In the winter of 1893, in a quiet American village called Willow Creek, a young mother went into labor. But as her son was being born, her own life slipped away. She was buried beneath the frozen ground, mourned by family and neighbors. Yet days later, whispers spread through the town. Strange cries were heard in the cemetery at night. Lanterns flickered, shovels struck the earth, and what they found inside that coffin became one of the most haunting true stories ever told. 1893 का दिसंबर का एक ठंडा और सन्नाटा भरा दिन था। यूएसए के एक छोटे से गांव विलो क्रीक में जिंदगी अपने आम रास्ते पर चल रही थी। बर्फ की पतली परत पूरी जमीन को ढक चुकी थी और हवाएं इतनी तेज थी कि दरख्तों की बारीक शाखें भी कांप रही थी। ऐसे वक्त में गांव के एक पुराने घर में एक जवान औरत मैरी कॉलिंस अपनी सांस के लिए जद्दोजहद कर रही थी। मैरी को कुछ दिनों से तेज बुखार था। गांव का डॉक्टर, जो सिर्फ जंगों के जमाने की किताबों से सीखा था, उसने मैरी का इलाज किया मगर बेकार। एक दिन सुबह जब मैरी की सांस हल्की और धीमी होने लगी, घर वालों ने समझा कि उसकी रूह उससे जुदा हो चुकी है। उस वक्त कोई एडवांस्ड मशीन, कोई स्टेथोस्कोप या मॉडर्न टेस्ट अवेलेबल नहीं था। सिर्फ हाथ से नड़ी चेक करना और सीने की हरकत देखना। हाई जिंदगी और मौत का फैसला था। डॉक्टर ने मैरी को गौर से देखा, उसके ठंडे होठ और ठंडी उंगलियों को महसूस किया। फिर देर से बोला, शी इज गॉन। घर वालों की चीखें निकाल गईं। मैरी की मां गिर पड़ी और उसका छोटा भाई रोना नहीं रोक पा रहा था। उस दिन दोपहर ही गांव में तैयारियां होने लगीं। 1890 में मुर्दों को देर तक रखना मुमकिन नहीं होता था, क्योंकि सर्दियों के बावजूद कोई प्रॉपर सिस्टम या मॉर्चुअरी मौजूद नहीं थी। इसलिए ऐसे केसेस में लोग तुरंत दफन कर देते थे। अगले दिन सुबह गांव के लोग ब्लैक कपड़े पहनकर मैरी के घर आए। एक सिंपल वुडन कॉफिन तैयार किया गया, जो एक लोकल कारपेंटर ने जल्दी में बनाया। उसमें मैरी का जिस्म रखा गया। उसके चेहरे पर एक अजीब सुकून था, या शायद थोड़ी सी जिद्दात भी थी, जैसे वो कहना चाहती हो कि सबने जल्दी में फैसला कर लिया। दोपहर तक गांव के चर्च के घंटे बजे और मैरी का जनाजा चल दिया। गांव की पतली सी गलियों से गुजरकर सब लोग उस पुराने सेमेटरी तक पहुंच गए, जो पहाड़ी के कोने पर था। ठंड और सन्नाटा मिलकर इस सफर को और भी दहशतनाक बना रहे थे। कॉफिन को मिट्टी के अंदर उतारा गया। प्रीस्ट ने बाइबल से आखिरी दुआएं पढ़ी और सब लोग अपने घर लौट गए। लेकिन कोई नहीं जानता था कि इस मिट्टी के नीचे अभी जिंदगी की आखिरी झलक दम तोड़ रही थी। उस रात जब गांव में सब लोग सो रहे थे, कब्रिस्तान के पास गुजरने वाले दो चरवाहा लंबियों के साथ अपने जानवरों को वापस ले जा रहे थे। अचानक उन्होंने मिट्टी के नीचे से एक अजीब सी हल्की पुकार सुनी। पहले उन्होंने समझा शायद हवा या किसी जानवर की आवाज है, लेकिन जब एक धीमी सी चीख बर्फीली हवा को चीर कर निकली, दोनों के खून जमा गए। उन्होंने एक दूसरे की तरफ देखा और समझ गए कोई जिंदा था मिट्टी के नीचे। लेकिन क्या वो मैरी थी, या गांव की पुरानी दास्तान सच होने जा रही थी, जिसमें कहा जाता था कि कुछ रूहें कब्रों से पुकार करती हैं। Night had fallen heavy over Willow Creek. The village slept under a blanket of silence, broken only by the faint rustle of the winter wind. But in the distance, near the cemetery on the hill, two shepherds kept watch over their flock. Their lanterns glowed faintly in the darkness, small circles of light swallowed by fog. Suddenly one of them froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The other tilted his head, listening carefully. At first there was nothing, just the sound of wind in the branches. But then it came again, a muffled, desperate sound, a cry. It was faint, like it came from beneath the earth itself. The men looked at each other, their faces pale in the lantern light. They followed the sound, their boots crunching over the snow. And then, standing before a freshly dug grave, they heard it again. Louder this time. A scratching, a weak pounding, and then the unmistakable sound of a woman's cry. Fear shot through their veins. One shepherd dropped his lantern. The flame sputtered in the snow. His lips trembled. "It can't be. It's impossible." But the sound continued, urgent, human, alive. The men ran back toward the village, shouting, banging on doors, waking the townsfolk. Within minutes, half the village was awake, carrying torches and shovels, rushing to the cemetery. Women clutched shawls around their shoulders. Children cried, old men crossed themselves, whispering prayers. When the villagers arrived at the grave, the priest himself stood silent, shaken. His voice trembled. "If what we hear is true, then we have buried her alive," the crowd gasped. No one wanted to believe it, but the cries came again, faint and heart-wrenching. Every second was precious. Men threw off their coats, grabbed shovels, and began to dig furiously. Snow and dirt flew into the air. Breath turned into fog as they worked with desperation. The sound of shovels striking frozen earth mixed with the faint cries beneath. The villagers' hearts raced. They dug as if their very souls depended on it. Children clung to their mothers, eyes wide with fear. The priest whispered psalms, his hands shaking. The night seemed endless, and yet every heartbeat counted. Finally, the wooden coffin was reached. The men stopped for a moment, their hands trembling. The priest raised his lantern, and all faces turned pale. Scratches marked the coffin's lid. Someone was inside. With one final blow, the lid cracked open, and what they saw made the entire village step back in horror. The graveyard fell silent. The only sound was the villagers' breath, sharp and fearful, mixing with the cold night air. All eyes fixed on the coffin lying beneath the lantern light. Its wooden lid bore deep scratches, the kind only fingernails could make. One of the men knelt, his hands trembling as he pried open the cracked lid. The wood groaned, splinters breaking loose. A gasp swept through the crowd as the inside came into view. There she was. The young woman who had been declared dead only hours earlier. Her skin pale as snow, her hair damp with sweat. Her eyes were half open, frozen in terror. Her fingers were torn and bloodied from clawing at the wood. A woman screamed and covered her child's eyes. Another fainted. The men stepped back, their shovels dropping into the snow. It was as if time itself had stopped. The priest whispered a prayer, his lips trembling. Lord have mercy. Some villagers believed they had just witnessed a miracle, proof that she had fought against death. Others thought it was something darker, unnatural, a curse that had struck their village. Fear and superstition wrapped around the crowd like a heavy fog. The doctor pushed forward, holding a lantern close. He placed trembling fingers on her wrist, searching for a pulse. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. But then, slowly, he lowered his head. "She's gone," he said softly. "Truly gone," the villagers murmured, a wave of sorrow and disbelief washing over them. She had lived long enough to claw, to scream, to beg for breath, but not long enough to be saved. Her final moments had been spent in the cold darkness of the grave, alone, unheard, and now her body lay before them, a haunting reminder of their mistake. Tears filled the eyes of her husband, who collapsed to his knees beside the coffin. He held her lifeless hand, whispering her name over and over again. His cries echoed through the night, a sound more chilling than the wind itself. The villagers stood in silence, burdened with guilt. They had rushed to bury her, trusting the doctor's word, never questioning. And now the truth was laid bare before them. The priest finally spoke. "This night will never be forgotten. Let it be a warning that life and death are not always what they seem." The lanterns flickered in the cold wind. The coffin remained open, its scratched lid a testimony of her struggle. No one in Willow Creek would sleep easily again. The wind howled across the graveyard, carrying with it the cries of the grieving husband. He clutched his wife's cold hand as though refusing to let go, his voice breaking into sobs. The villagers stood in silence, their torches flickering, shadows dancing across the snow-covered ground. Some whispered that they had buried her too soon. Others, trembling, claimed it was a punishment from God. The night had turned into something no one in Willow Creek would ever forget. The doctor tried to explain himself, his voice shaking. She had no pulse, no breath. I swear she was gone. But his words only deepened the guilt in the villagers' eyes. A mother in the crowd clutched her child and said, "If even the living can be mistaken for the dead, who among us is truly safe?" The priest ordered the coffin to be carried back to her family's home. 4 men lifted it with heavy hearts, their steps slow and uncertain. The procession moved through the snow-covered paths, torches glowing against the darkness, their breath misting in the freezing air. Inside the house, candles were lit. The coffin was placed upon a table, its scratched lid leaning nearby like a silent accusation. The husband refused to leave her side. He pressed his forehead against hers, whispering promises she could no longer hear. As the night wore on, the villagers lingered outside, afraid to return to their beds. Fear clung to them like the cold. Some swore they could still hear her cries echoing in the wind, though the coffin lay open before them. The priest addressed the gathering with a trembling voice. "This woman's struggle is not just her own. It is a reminder to us all that life is fragile, that we must not trust shadows and silence as proof of death." The villagers nodded, but the horror of what had happened gnawed at them. Children asked their mothers why the woman had been buried alive. Mothers had no answers. The husband remained by her side until dawn, refusing food, refusing warmth. His eyes were empty, haunted by the thought of her final moments, the moments he could never take away. By morning, the village had changed. Where once there was routine and peace, now there was fear and suspicion. Every sickbed became a place of doubt. Every silence was filled with dread. The scratched coffin stood as a symbol, a scar upon Willow Creek's memory, proof that death did not always arrive quietly, and that sometimes the living were taken before their time. The night in Willow Creek was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of the cold wind pushing through the bare trees. Snow crunched under hurried feet as a small group of villagers made their way back to the cemetery, lanterns swaying in their trembling hands. What they had heard could not be real, at least they prayed it wasn't. Yet the whispers spread like fire. Someone had heard cries from beneath the earth. The grieving husband led the way, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. His heart pounded as he stumbled through the snow, torn between hope and terror. Behind him came the doctor, shaking his head, muttering that it was impossible. The priest clutched his Bible to his chest, whispering prayers, though his voice faltered as if he, too, feared what they might find. When they reached the cemetery, the air felt colder, heavier, as though the earth itself held its breath. Lanterns cast long shadows across the crooked tombstones, and there, at the freshly dug grave, the sound came again, muffled, weak, desperate. It was the sound of life clawing against death. The villagers froze. Some gasped. Others wept openly. And then with trembling urgency, men dropped to their knees and began to dig. Shovels struck the frozen earth, breaking through ice and soil. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. The cries grew fainter, weaker, each muffled sob a race against time. The husband clawed at the dirt with his bare hands, tearing his nails, not feeling the pain. His breath came in gasps, white clouds spilling into the night as he shouted her name again and again. "Hold on, I'm here!" His voice cracked, breaking with desperation, his tears mixing with the falling snow. The doctor tried to stop them, saying it was madness. But no one listened. Hope had already taken hold, dangerous, fragile, unstoppable. At last, the wooden lid of the coffin appeared. It was scratched, cracked as if from inside. The husband's scream tore through the night as he dropped to his knees. "She's alive! God help us, she's alive!" The villagers pulled the lid open, their lanterns spilling light into the darkness of the coffin. What they saw inside froze their blood and broke their hearts all at once. The coffin creaked as the villagers forced the lid open. For a heartbeat, no one dared to breathe. Lantern light spilled into the wooden box. And there she was, the young mother. Her face pale as snow, her eyes wide with terror, Her nails were bloodied from scratching the wood, her lips cracked and trembling. She was alive, barely. Her chest rose in shallow gasps, each breath a war against the suffocating darkness that had nearly claimed her. A cry rose from the crowd, half joy, half horror. The husband fell over the coffin, clutching her hand, sobbing her name. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I've got you. You're safe now. You're safe." But safety was only an illusion. For in her arms, wrapped in her torn burial cloth, was the tiny form of her newborn son. He was silent, still, his small face pressed against her chest, as though he had shared her grave. The villagers fell silent, the night filled only with the howling wind. The mother tried to speak, her voice nothing more than a ragged whisper. "My baby, save him." She coughed, a trickle of blood staining her lips. The doctor pushed forward, lifting the infant, desperately checking for signs of life. For a moment, nothing. And then, so faint it seemed impossible, a cry. A newborn's cry pierced the graveyard, high and fragile, echoing through the cold night like a miracle. The villagers gasped, some falling to their knees in prayer. The priest raised his trembling hand toward the sky, tears in his eyes, as though God himself had reached into the earth to pull life from death. But the miracle came with a price. The young mother's strength was gone. She smiled weakly at the sound of her son's cry, her eyes closing as if in peace. Her chest lifted one final time, then fell still. She had fought her way back from the grave only to give her last breath to her child. The husband wailed, cradling both his wife and son in his arms, torn between grief and gratitude. Around him the villagers bowed their heads, the priest whispering prayers for a soul that had endured the unthinkable. In the frozen cemetery of Willow Creek, 1893, a story was carved into history. A mother buried alive, a son born in death's shadow, a miracle that cost a life. And to this day, old folk in Willow Creek whisper of the grave that cried, of the woman who died as her child was born, leaving behind a tale too haunting to forget. Thanks you for watch. Every old story holds a lesson worth remembering. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for watch and listen more old times, real stories, and don't forget,